The temple we were staying at was under construction. And they were like, okay, when we first get there, the staff would get there a day or two before the rest of the students. And we had to like figure out what was off limits and what was okay to go around. And so we're walking around the temple, and I take this turn right outside the dormitory, right around the corner, and there's this huge marijuana plant just right there, right next to it. Everyone could see it. I'm like, yep, this has got to be off limits. Welcome to Mindfulness of Doom, a weekly podcast about life, peaceful living, and existential dread. You're not lost. Everyone's faking it, and the purpose of life is, enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 9 of Mindfulness of Doom, Varying Degrees of Monkhood, Part 2. I am here in the studio by myself because Brian has succumbed to the sickness, and he has been sick for several weeks. So we're quite glad that we have recorded a couple podcasts ahead of time, but he has not yet caught up to being healthy enough to be back on air. So I'm here alone. But I'm not actually here alone. I'm here with my special guest, Ernest Ivan, who has been friends with me for years. He was one of my Krav Maga students and friend and confidant. And I talked to him about my studies in China, living in a monastery. And I convinced him to go. And he actually went on the program that I used to teach at. And I've asked him to be on the show with us today to talk about the Wooden Fish program and their humanistic, monastic, Buddhist life program. They have several different programs. One where it's focused more towards graduate students, and they go to these caves in China with a lot of famous scroll works and murals painted on the walls. And then they have another program that's kind of a shorter program that they do in the winter. But their flagship program is this 1-month program where they take a bunch of undergraduate students, graduate students, and interested parties from all over the world. Some people from Harvard, from Yale, from University of Miami, from Florida International University, from Europe. There were students from Japan, students from France, from Canada, from Germany. There were students from all over the world there. They take about 65 students a year, and they're always kind of trying to push the number up and up. Last I heard, they were trying to get it close to 100. And they put them in a Zen monastery in China for a month, shut the doors, and say, here, be in China, be in a Zen monastery. We're going to give you 3 hours of academic lectures a day by professors, PhD candidates. You do several hours of meditation a day. They teach you Tai Chi. They teach you how to eat mindfully. They teach you how to sit, how to stand, how to walk, how to breathe. All those things you thought you learned when you were a child, but actually you just faked it up until this point. Ivan, you are back from China. It's been several months since you've been back. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, man, where's your head at? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've been gardening a lot. I've been going to school a lot. And in the back of my mind is my experience at Wooden Fish. And it's something that I don't think I'm going to forget or really understand wholly for a while. I think it's one of those experiences that you go through in your life that you feel a certain way as you're starting it, you feel another way as you're going through it, another way when it ends, and it slowly changes as time passes. And I don't know what to think of it now. I think it's going to be with me for a long time, and I'd like to go back to China, maybe go as a counselor at some point within the program. But it's something that changed me in ways that I haven't figured out completely yet. And I think it's a very good thing for people to step away from their lives, be able to observe how they think, observe how they live, and see what happens afterwards. In my case, a lot of change happened afterwards. I left my job where I'd been for more than 5 years. I was making decent money. I left that job. I enrolled back in school. I changed the relationship I was with or in, and I think of my life a little bit differently than before I went into the program. So it's a very good program.
I was really happy that you decided to go, and I was pushing you for several years to go, and I was saying, "This is for you, man. This is really something that I think that you were going to find useful for your life. And when you finally did get to go, I was so proud. I was so excited for you. What was it like before you went? What did you think that you were going to learn, and what did you learn?
This is one of those things that I think I've ridden a roller coaster 3 or 4 times in my life.
You haven't been to Disney World then, have you?
No, not the big Disney World. I was to Epcot and MGM. Can you believe that? My childhood. I've never seen... anyway.
You're from Florida.
Yeah, can you believe it? Yeah.
You were born and raised here in Miami?
I was. I enjoyed the beach a lot. But I've been on a roller coaster 3 times, and this felt like one of those things where I don't know what to expect. I know it's going to be a hell of a ride, and I just went for it. And was open to the experience, and I had a very different experience than others there.
I think everyone's experience tends to be pretty unique.
Yeah.
The first, I went twice. The first time I went as a student, and the second time I went as a staff member, and I was helping to teach the meditation classes and helping to teach the martial arts classes there. And kind of being a bit of a guide. I was kind of the disciplinarian.
I heard.
Yeah. I'm the big tall guy, and they're with a strong looking beard. So they were like, "Oh, you look nice and mean. Let's make you the disciplinarian." But I'm like super affable and friendly, so I was like, I didn't even want that job. But when they gave it to me, it ended up being great because I was the guy that had to stand up in front of the line and make everyone do standing meditation, and stand there and make them just swelter in the sun. And I ended up kind of liking it because I like setting up people for an uncomfortable situation and then saying something super inspirational and then making them enjoy the thing that they were doing that they moments ago were hating, just by setting up the right context for them to understand the experiences that they were going through. And I felt that sometimes I made mistakes, and sometimes I felt like I really connected, and sometimes I felt like I was a bit heavy-handed. But all in all, it was one of the best experiences of my life. But why do you say that it was different for you than from other people? What was the...
Most of the people put their phone away, and I didn't. That's one reason.
I noticed. I kept seeing you post stuff online, and I kept wanting to yell at you and be like, "Get off your phone! You're a monastery." So your monastery had Wi-Fi then?
Yeah, it did. It had Wi-Fi and hot water, and apparently had mattresses before they were taken away, and tatami mattresses were put in.
I'm just scoffing at you. You know, I slept on a pallet of 2x4s with a sheet thrown over it for a month. No AC.
Holy smoke.
In the middle of July. We were roughing it. It sounded like you were in some sort of upscale hotel.
Yeah, it was. But there was a week where we didn't make eye contact with others. During that week, we didn't speak with others.
You're talking about the silent meditation week that they do at the end of the program.
Yeah, in week 3, and it's funny because when that was over, we got to speak about it with each other, and we all thought that our experience was in some way unique because we had very vivid dreams, and then everyone around us tells us that they had very vivid dreams. That's just one thing that happened that we didn't expect, and we all went through at the same time without knowing it. Yeah. And it was very beautiful to see that. It was one of the many things that I experienced there that I won't forget and I'll take with me around.
I had the same thing happen to me. I normally don't remember my dreams. I'll go years without remembering one. It feels like I haven't had dreams. But when I went to the monastery, suddenly, when you stop drinking and smoking and having going to bed at all hours and never having a regular sleeping pattern and never having regular exercise, and then suddenly they throw you in this monastery where they tell you where to stand, they tell you what to wear, they tell you where to go and when to be there, they tell you how to sit, how to speak, when not to speak, how to eat. They literally take away all of your decisions. It's very much like being in prison or the military. But in doing that, it feels so liberating. After the first week is really difficult. And then after a while, you kind of give up resisting. And in your mind, you become free to really enjoy the experiences that you're having. And so by the time you get to that silent meditation week, where you know where to go, you know where to stand, you know where to be and when to be there, and then they say, all right, this next week is silent meditation week. Everything up until that point has been a meditation anyway, but now you can't communicate about it. Now you're discouraged from even making eye contact. And it is the loneliest feeling I had ever had in my life up until that point. But I got to spend so much time with myself that I started to form this new relationship with who I am in a way that was the most intimate thing I had ever done up until that point. And so when you were telling me about your vivid dreams, like, yeah, for me, the same thing. I just started dreaming every night, having these crazy vivid dreams, partly because of the routine, partly because of you're in China in a monastery, and there's just like there's all of these new things going on around you all the time. And
you're right. When you have to make less decisions, when you make less decisions as a day goes by, when you don't have to think about what to wear, what to eat, or when to eat, when to sleep, when to get up, how much exercise you're having, when you don't have to think about that, when you just do these things regularly, when you have a routine, a schedule, it opens up your mind for other things. And that is something very tough to do on this side of the world, I think, for many people. It's very tough to do outside of a monastery. But moving gradually toward that, understanding the benefits of that, and making changes daily toward that end is something good and valuable. And it's interesting because I knew someone a very long time ago that I worked with. She was in IT, she was in her 60s, and she was miserable most of the time. Her name was Connie, and she wore this blue sweater all the time that had matted and smelled like old person and all that. And she was a character, and she had white hair, and she was thin and slightly wrinkly and very pale. And she hated her job, which was IT, and she was about to retire. But she lived close to her dad, and we had conversations once in a while because we connected in a weird level. We connected, and we talked. And one of the things she mentioned to me more than 10 years ago that kept rattling around my head for all this time, because I couldn't quite make something out of it, but I knew it was important. She told me once that her dad was pushing 90 or around 90, had told her consistently through her life, he'd said that it's important for people to have a routine, that people need a routine. I couldn't figure out what that meant, but it seemed valuable. And after this trip that I had, this experience that I had in China, it finally made sense 10 years after how important it is to have a routine, because it adds a stability to your life that is necessary for creative thought, for things to happen between those set points of the day. And I'm doing my best to get on that route, on that ship.
The people in this program have the option of shaving their head. It's not mandatory, but the idea there is that you are renouncing your desire to be attractive, that you're giving up, because hair is it's a thing of beauty. It's especially for women. And it gives you a lot of character, and it gives you personality. And you yourself had long hair for years. I mean, it was down to your middle of your back, right?
Yeah,
pretty long.
Yeah.
Now you've cut it, and I was kind of hoping you would do the shaved head thing in the monastery, but it turns out you needed to push from a lovely lady to get it to happen.
Maybe. The particular haircut that I have, which I think it's called a top bun, I think I first saw it on the Green or the White Ranger in the Power Rangers in the 90s. I think that's where I first saw this haircut. But the motivation to get that one was a lovely lady who I love. She suggested it, and I got it. But I have very thick hair, and I have a lot of it. And it weighed a lot, and it was bothering my neck. That's what got me to shave my hair. But I didn't do it at the monastery because I think putting my phone away, I think a lot of these things, maybe rightly, were things that some people, not people of the program, but other people, like fellow students, said or thought that it was the right thing to do. It was a good thing to do. And I I guess I'm a rebel, and I wanted to resist and see how it would be if I didn't. Of all the month that I spent in China, there's one thing that is stuck in my mind, and it's a leper who came to our bus, and he came to ask for money. And one of the counselors, a man Buddhist for a long time, fluent in Chinese, been to China for a long time, this guy knew his stuff, directed everyone, specifically me, not to give this man any money. Because apparently the sick and the handicapped get pimped out in China. Sometimes they get messed up on purpose, or people mess them up, and they get a cut of it, and most of it goes to their pimp. Apparently, this happens in China. And this guy, the counselor, is don't give him any money. But I can see that this guy was a leper. He has fingers falling off. His face is deformed. And I worked for a dermatologist for a while. I've only seen pictures of this in books. I gave him $1, the equivalent of $1. This guy was telling me, don't give him any money or whatever. And as I looked at this guy in the face, as he told me not to, I whipped out my wallet. I took the 10 yuan and I gave it to the leper. And then he, and then the guy was furious, but he tried to control himself. Asked the leper to remove himself from the area. He did. And then in the bus, I could tell he was livid. And then he apologized to me. And then I explained to him that this guy really had leprosy. It was evident. It was obvious. And the one thing that I get out of it, or I keep thinking about, is how sometimes we have to do what is uncomfortable if it's what we believe to be right, no matter what. And sometimes someone you might piss off or might be wholly against that will come back later and apologize and maybe thank you because they learned something new. And that's one thing, after more than a month spending in China, being in a monastery, that sticks with me as being a very important thing to remember.
So you gave him money more to spite the guy that told you not to?
No, I did it because I thought it was what I should do, or what the drive in me said to do. I didn't think I should or needed to cut my hair. I didn't think or should put my phone away to get an experience, something good out of this. In retrospect, I think it would have been a good thing to put my phone away, but I couldn't. The person that I was with, was going through something dangerous and difficult in her life, and I thought and that I needed to keep in contact with her. So I kept in contact with her and made sure everything was okay. I think it's important to do what's right, no matter what you think is right. And when you make a mistake, to realize it and correct it. It's good to be humble and open in life and slow down enough to be able to see these things as they happen and just after they happen. That's something I learned from the program. It's important to slow down, otherwise you can't see anything. It's important to have a routine, so you can get creativity out of your life, to squeeze creativity out of your life. It's important to slow down so you can see what you've done and what you haven't done.
These are the little things that helped me. One is that learning to be hungry and be okay with it. I used to get really frustrated when I wouldn't eat. And after the program, now I can go hours and hours and hours while hungry, and it doesn't bother me anymore. They fed us quite well. They give you breakfast and give you lunch, and your supper is what they call medicine meal. And historically, monks would only eat twice a day. But the Chinese love food, and they didn't want to be as strict about the food requirement, because when you had to take your medicine, you would often take it with a meal. You needed to take food with it. So they made the exception for medicine meal, and now it's become the practice that you can eat 3 meals a day, or at least for the program, for the students in the program you could. But I actually got in the habit sometimes of skipping that third meal.
Me too.
Yeah. And being okay with being hungry. Also being okay with standing. I have a degenerative disc disease in my back, and I experience pain every single day. And sometimes it would get really uncomfortable, but the more I stretched and took care of myself, the less the pain was. And I was also very picky about being sweaty and in the heat and uncomfortable. Growing up in Florida, you're constantly sweating, and I would just love being inside in the air conditioning. And then after a month of sweating out in the sun, I didn't care anymore. It didn't bother me to be uncomfortable, and it released me in a way from my burden of always having to be comfortable that nowadays I am so much better off being able to go about my day not having to be in total comfort. It made me such a, I want to say a better person, simply because I wasn't concerned with those things anymore. I could spend that mental energy doing the things that I was actually doing instead of constantly trying to change my circumstances to be better, to be more comfortable.
You get used to the heat. You get used to a different rhythm of life. And you learn that it's not too bad. It's not so bad to skip a meal. Your mind doesn't have to go into panic mode. And being hungry isn't that big of a deal. It can be a good thing too. And it's learning to be a little bit uncomfortable once in a while is a good thing. In fact, toward the end of the program, I was taking cold showers because that little bit of uncomfortableness made me feel good.
You masochist. Living in the monastery and you're eating nothing but super oily vegetarian food for a month.
I had a couple of accidents. The first since elementary school.
Yeah, it's it is hard to get used to, because first of all, you're in another country which has totally different bacteria in the water and in the food, and you got to get used to that. But then in addition to that, the food at the monastery, which I don't know about your monasteries, but mine was super good, but really oily, like super super oily, and well, let's just say that nobody had a solid shit for a month.
Yeah.
I tried to be euphemistic about it, and then it just didn't come out.
Yeah. I think someone gave me an American protein bar at some point, and they started serving us eggs a couple of weeks in.
Really?
Yeah, and that helped. But, when it came toward the end of the second week, a lot of fiber, a lot of oil. It was not even a colon cleanse. It was a cleanse of every organ, I'm sure. I mean, I was squeaky clean inside.
Did you measure your weight loss?
Yeah, 25 pounds.
You lost 25 pounds in a month.
I've done my best to regain 15 of that or so.
Oh, my goodness. I lost... This is probably... For anybody out there who wants to lose weight, I highly recommend Wooden Fish. I was 255 pounds when I went into Wooden Fish. I came out and I was like 222. Yeah. I couldn't believe how much weight I lost. I had not been that skinny since undergrad. 10 years before.
And I got to mention,
and I'm a big guy. I'm really tall, so like 222 is like I was pretty trim.
Yeah, and I got to mention that I got into a skateboard accident years ago, so I've got a little bit of that arthritis on a knee or two, and an ankle or two, and a lot of pain every day. In fact, before I went to Wooden Fish, I was in a lot of pain. In fact, I had steroids injected into both of my knees. When I finished the program, if I knew how to dance, I'd be able to dance. I felt so good, not only because of the amount of weight off my knees. I'm like 5'11", and I weigh like 200 and 215. But eating that way, which reduces inflammation based on what I've read, having very little sugar, having regular exercise, stretching because you're sitting in those positions. I haven't done something that was that good for my health since I did PE or gym in high school. I hadn't gone through something that made me feel that good in a very long time. It's a very good program, and it helps the body and the brain too. You think better.
And then also, when you're in the monastery, you're living by, as we talked about on a previous episode, you're living by the monastic precepts, which are rules for monks. So no killing, no speaking false truths, no taking that which is not given to you. So in other words, no stealing, but more encompassing than that. No sexual conduct, and then no intoxicants. So for a month, you can't smoke, you can't drink, and you feel amazing because you're just out there sweating all the time, and you sweat out so much, and you're doing Tai Chi every day, you're doing walking meditation every day. They are working you, and it's phenomenal. When I was a student at the Wooden Fish Project, I was also in grad school and was needing to write a paper on the experience while I was there. And I actually was they were kind of getting on to me a little bit about how much time I was spent writing on the computer. And eventually they told me that I couldn't use electronics anymore and that I had to handwrite it. And I was pretty upset because at the time I felt really indignant about it because most people were students. And the nun who runs the program, Venerable Ifa, is an amazing teacher, and she's a powerhouse of a woman. And she has a PhD and a law degree. And so I figured she would understand, but she was like, no, you're in the program. You need to be putting away these attachments. And she told me I could write the paper, but I needed to handwrite it. I'm like, oh my God, this paper is supposed to be like 20 or 30 pages typed. And I was pretty livid at the time, but I'll tell you something interesting. When I started handwriting the paper, I hadn't handwritten a paper since I was in middle school. Everything else had been typed. And I found that my ability to write skyrocketed because it slowed me down. Like I had more time to think between writing words. And it made me think more about the sentences instead of the words because you have to write one word at a time as opposed to on a text computer where you can jump around and write a little here, then jump up there and write a little there. And it enabled my ADD a little bit too much. And then when you have to write it down by hand, you have to be mindful to leave yourself a little extra space. And it lets your first draft really be a first draft instead of editing before you're done with the first draft. And my paper, I feel, ended up being better, although my professors probably wouldn't agree. I was actually ended up being quite grateful for that limitation. And as a student, I didn't use the internet. We didn't have Wi-Fi most of the time we were there. They gave us a couple of days where they turned it on, and they had these little hotspots on their phones that would let us all contact home and just be like, hey, we're fine, we didn't join a cult, and having a great experience, love you, see you when I get back. But when I was a teacher, the teachers had more leeway, and it was hard to keep the practice as much as a staff member. But they have a different job, and it's really stressful. All the people who are in the program, all the teachers are amazing people, and a lot of the people who were there with your group were the same people that I worked with, and they were an amazing bunch of individuals. Everybody brought something really phenomenal to the program, and they're like my second family. I miss them dearly, and they're all over the world, and one of these days I hope we all reconnect. The experience as a staff member is a bit different because you're constantly having to organize and plan for events, and in China, especially in this particular program, things happen and change much faster than you can plan for. And a lot of times your plans fall apart at the last minute, and you have to scramble to come up with something cohesive. And it was its own practice that I learned more being a staff member than I did being a student. I missed being a student when I was a staff member because it was, in a way, harder, but easier. Harder to go through physically, but easier mentally. And the staff position was easier physically and harder mentally. The day-to-day schedule was a little bit different in each experience, but I was curious, what was like an average day for you in the program?
Well, we got up at 5:15, 5:20 in the morning. Then at 5:55 or so, we had to gather for Tai Chi. And we had Tai Chi for about an hour. It was beautiful. As the sun was coming up, the day was still cool. And we got to experience that beautiful morning sunlight, doing these movements that make you more conscious of your body. Just very lovely to start off the day with Tai Chi. Then we had breakfast, awesome vegetarian food. And we had, I'd say, 2 or 3 lectures throughout the day. Around 11:55, we would go for lunch, come back for the 3rd lecture, as I recall. Then we did meditation right after that. Early afternoon, we'd do meditation. We'd meditate for about an hour. Then we got to do art or understand an aspect of Chinese culture, whether it be their art, their musical instruments, the tea ceremony. And after that, we would have dinner. Then we would have the evening vespers where we go to the temple. We have time for ourselves throughout the day a little bit. We'll have, like after lunch, we'll have some time to ourselves, like about an hour. But after evening vespers, we go to our rooms and we gather our thoughts and take a shower, and then we were in bed by 10. So it was really academic. And it was like that for a number of weeks, for a couple of weeks. Third week, it was all about meditation, 9 meditation sessions a day. And the fourth week, we traveled around China a little bit, different temples. We got a better understanding of the culture. And I recommend anyone that does the program to stay for about a week or two after the program and travel to Beijing, travel around China, and meet people. Stay at a hostel. The Leo hostel is very good in Beijing. You'll meet amazing, fabulous people. Even though that I stayed for just a little bit over a week after the program, that time was priceless and very valuable. And I encourage anyone that does a program to stay around for a little bit.
I agree. One of the best things about the program is, in a weird way, the end of it, where you spend this really hard month doing really healthy things. There is a tremendous stress reliever at the end of the program when you go back to Beijing. And this is not part of the program, but what ends up happening is everybody goes back to Beijing, and those people who have scheduled time to stick around a little longer, there's this period of retoxing at the end of the program where everybody goes out drinking and partying in Beijing for a few days. And because it is a monastic program, but come on, we're all human here. So when you get back to Beijing, everybody goes out and has a big party. And it's actually, I'll tell you, the best 2 meals I've had in my entire life were both during the Wooden Fish Project. Is that when we got my first year there, when we got done and we had to fly back we took a bus tour back to Changsha, from all across the country. And we got back there, and Venerable Ifa took us to this 5-star hotel restaurant, and it was amazing. And the food just kept coming, and there was beer. And oh my goodness, having a beer after a month was the greatest. Just after a hard month of sweating and exercising and really earning it, that was the best meal of my life. I can't even name the things that we ate, and it sticks with me to this day. I'll never forget it. You meet the best people in the world, and I miss all of them. The temple we stayed at had a big farm, and they had us, for a couple days, they had us go out into the farm and actually weed the farm with the monks, which normally, I don't know if they do normally or not, but they went out with us, and they would give us Dharma talks, and they would teach, and then we had some translators out there who would talk about their lessons. I think this is going to rest with me for the rest of my life. They had me as the disciplinarian for the program, mostly because of my size, but I ended up really enjoying that role. But I was instructed to be really hard on the students at the beginning, to be really strict, and to lighten up as the program went on. So I was kind of cracking the whip a little bit about minor infractions pretty early on. I was the guy who had to explain to everybody what the temple etiquette was and how to behave, and you can't do yoga in the temple, and you can't play frisbee in the temple. This is a place for meditation. It's a particular style of meditation. So there are certain things you can do in private and certain things you can do in public. And so I had to be pretty hard on the students. And the abbot of the temple, when we were out in the fields picking weeds out of the gardens, came up to me, and he said, and this was translated, there was a translator there, and he said to me, he said, "It is better to lead with charisma than with discipline." And I told him, I agree, but I've been instructed to be hard on the students at first and to lighten up as I go. But I want to do I want to do what you've asked me to do. But since he was the abbot of the temple, he was the host, but he wasn't actually the leader of the program. He looked at me, and without missing a beat, he just looked at me and nodded, and he said, "Your suffering is very great." And I cried. Right there on the spot. I couldn't hold it back. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't realize that I was vulnerable or in an emotional state, but it just hit me so hard because I feel like I'm a pretty charismatic person, and I've often been a teacher. I've been a teacher my whole adult life, and I have seen charismatic people lead, and I knew what he was saying when he said it, and sometimes I know that I am overly strict with my students, and I don't want to be, and it's something that, like, he saw it so clearly, and he said it so plainly. Then when I told him that I was being instructed to do the thing that I was already doing, but it was something that I had struggled with personally, and he just looked right through me and said the thing I needed to hear. And it just, I couldn't hold it back. It was too much truth in such a short time, and I just cried, and I smiled at him and laughed, and I was like, yeah, I know. And it has stuck with me forever after that. And just, I always try to remember, lead with charisma, because people will follow you voluntarily. But if you lead with discipline, they will resent you for it. Discipline is something that you earn and show people, and it's a skill that you earn for yourself. But if you force it on people, it builds this resentment. But if you have this charismatic ability to inspire people, the discipline will come by your example instead of you telling them to. And it was probably one of the greatest lessons that I've received in my life.
One of the beautiful things I experienced was after the program, I took a train, which, by the way, I hadn't scheduled any plans to go anywhere after. I was going to hang out where this program was, around Shanghai. I decided halfway through the program that I'd take a train up to Beijing. I had no idea how the heck to do any of this, but I figured it out somehow. And I got to a hostel, a random hostel that I was referred to, and I was there for a couple of days, and this was many, many hundreds of miles from Shanghai, from where the program had been. And I'm going through the hutong of Beijing, just walking the streets, and suddenly I see someone, a familiar face coming through, and it was this girl who had been at the program for the first week, and I randomly, we looked at each other, and all of a sudden we ran to each other, we gave each other a hug. It was absolutely lovely to see her. In the middle of Beijing, far, far away from where this journey had started, in some random street, I saw someone I hadn't seen in weeks, randomly there. It was absolutely lovely. We had a bite, we talked, we shared experiences, and I won't forget what a lovely feeling it is to, in the middle of nowhere, far removed from where you first met, to see someone, an old friend.
To be just on the other side of the planet,
Yeah.
just randomly in a city, just run into somebody.
In Beijing, of all places, millions of people around, and I was on this street at the same time that she was, and it's just weird.
I don't really believe that we are the same person all the time. We're constantly evolving and growing and changing, and this idea, this narrative that we have of ourselves in our own heads is more of an illusion than any other thing that we experience in our lives. And this experience, for me, was such a powerful turning point. Who I was before the program and who I was after the program were completely different people. I felt like not that I had changed, but the person who had gone into it had, in a sense, had an ego death and had come out of it on the other side a completely different individual. How do you think about that? Do you feel the same way? Did you experience any sort of ego death?
It changes you in ways you don't even realize, and there's a lot of academics in it, and you realize that a lot of Buddhism is about letting go, about understanding that everything essentially dies and comes to an end, and making peace with that. Nothing is permanent, everything is impermanence, everything ends. And you change, you definitely change, and I think you change in ways that continue. Parts of you will look back at the experience and you'll realize that you were someone else before you got into the program, and it's a really good thing. But when we talk about doom and mindfulness and being aware of that, that's serious. I mean, I've seen how it is when we come to life's end. I've gone through this in my life. I've seen it. And this experience, the Wooden Fish program, it tells you in a certain way by studying Buddhism that it's okay for things to come to an end. That there's a certain peace in knowing that everything comes to an end. And it's important to enjoy life, to be good, to live life well. And you live life well by, as this experience taught me, you live life well by not losing yourself in the rush of time, in the stream of time, but being able to once in a while, at the very least, stop, look around you, figure out where you're going, where you want to go, where you need to go, and what the hell's going on, who you need to love more, who you need to be kinder to. I think it's important to do that, and this program helped me realize some of that.
Ivan, do you have any shout-outs? Anybody that you want to say hello to?
Yeah, shout out to anyone from the Wooden Fish program that's tuning in to listen to this. To Amandra, you know who you are. To George and Nina, I know they'll be listening to this. And to anyone else who tunes in to this program with the hopes of getting a nugget out of it, something that they can carry around with them. I hope you got that from this podcast, from this episode. And you'll continue to get that from this series. There are many nuggets here, many lessons from people that have lived. Everyone lives a different life, but few of us get to sit down and go over some of the valuable things we've learned in life, and I think it's important to give those to each other if we can. So a shout out to those that take something from this show or try to take something from it.
And I would actually like to throw some shout outs of my own. There's far too many people to name, but the people that absolutely 100% deserve some recognition are the staff members and the teachers of this program who put in so much hard work and effort to help the students have this amazing experience. Kim, Gutorm, Sean, Jordan, Carl, Peter, Ryan, Kim, Fernie, you guys are beautiful and amazing, and you're my family, and I love you all, and I miss you, and regardless of where you are in the world, my heart goes out to you, and I hope you're all doing well. And to everyone else in the Wooden Fish Project who has been a previous member or a current one, whether I know you or not, you're my family. And come to Miami. I'll put you up. We'll share stories and have good times. And of course, this whole program of the Wooden Fish Project would not exist if it was not for Venerable Aoife, who is the nun who runs the program. She is amazing. She's a very tough woman and an amazing teacher. I just want to send out a special thank you to her for putting this together. The program just would not exist without you, and thank you so much for being my teacher. My heart goes out to you, and omitofo.
There's sometimes you meet someone that blows you away or teaches you something profound, and Venerable Aoife is one of those individuals. You can tell she has a passion for what she does. She's got guts. She's tough. And there's something there that I am grateful to have met, to have encountered in my life. So I'm grateful to Venerable Aoife. Madam, thank you for your time, for your dedication, for your love, your compassion. You've taught us a lot, and we'll carry with us the lessons that we learn as long as we roam this world. Thank you.
Now's the part of the podcast where we thank everyone for attending and listening to the show. We have no real sponsors on the show. If you'd like to support Mindfulness of Doom, you can contact us at www.mindfulnessofdoom@gmail.com if you're interested in sponsoring us. But in lieu of real sponsors, we have real fake sponsors. So today, real fake sponsors. This week's episode is brought to you by Monastic Wi-Fi, intermittent at best, and filtered by the Chinese government.
This episode was brought to you in part by the makers of the famous matted blue sweater. When you miss the smell of old people, I'm sure Connie has an extra one lying around.
This podcast is also brought to you by Miami Haircuts, Dapper AF.
This podcast brought you in part by lack of eye contact, intimacy at its best.
This podcast is also brought to you by Cheeseless Pizza, the official podcast snack of Mindfulness of Doom, care of our Facebook supporters. Also, we open announcements this week. My apprentice Yutaka is also here in the studio, and he's been doing quite well in his training. He's week 3 out of 4, been training in martial arts, self-defense, meditation, mindfulness, philosophy, Dharma talks, and English acquisition, language and culture. He's been doing great, and his apprenticeship is soon to be over, and he's going to be transferring over to be studying under the great Brian Lemmerman. Going to be studying drawing, architecture, and mindfulness. So, for you Mindfulness of Doom listeners, I will be taking apprentices. If you are interested in learning martial arts, self-defense, meditation, mindfulness, philosophy, English and or Japanese cultural acquisition, tea ceremony, basically any of the hobbies or interests that I've had up until this point in my life, I turn them into a way of living your life. Something a little bit different from what most martial arts teachers do when they teach just the body, the spirit, or the mind. I try to teach all three in a holistic teaching approach. So if you live in the Miami area and are interested in becoming an apprentice, I have a program. You can reach out to me at corydharma@gmail.com, corydharma@gmail.com. We also have a new segment here on Mindfulness of Doom. We have our number one fan, Brian Kerr, has been usurped. Our new number one fan is Kara Caterson, holding the title until someone else tells us that they're our number one fan. If you have a question about mindfulness, or for one of our guests, or would like to ask a question to Brian or myself, you can send us an email to mindfulnessofdoom@gmail.com. We are also very grateful to our Patreon supporters. This podcast is Patreon supported. If you like what you hear and would like to send us a buck or two, you can feel free to check us out at www.patreon.com/mindfulnessofdoom.
We invite you to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast on iTunes and wherever podcasts of real quality can be found. Have suggestions, music, or artwork for the show? Want to sponsor our podcast? Find our contact page and links to the items we talked about in this episode at www.mindfulnessofdoom.com.
This podcast is recorded at the Center for Social Change in Miami, Florida. It is written, edited, and recorded by Brian Lemmerman and Corey Hardacre. Our music is by Pallettown and can be found at soundcloud.com/Pallettown. All poorly thought out opinions are ours. Nothing you hear in this podcast should be construed as professional medical advice. Go see a therapist, all of you.
Actually, guys, in the passport, it says that it's illegal to give your passport to somebody else.